Loren never expected to be here. His life changed in a matter of seconds. One after the other, the hands and white paddles flashed into the air. Loren watched as the number went higher and higher, his head spinning as he watched it all happen. All in all, it took 77 seconds to change his life forever. And here is: man sells grandma's old blanket for $1.5 million. Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. It had been a difficult decade for Loren Kreitzer. He'd made a career out of being a carpenter, but work was slow and freelance jobs few and far between. As a result, he was barely scraping by. Some months he would barely scrape by. What he didn't know was that his life was about to change and help would come from the strangest source. Loren's grandmother had passed away 3 years earlier. He went to his grandmother's house to collect the books and other items that she'd promised. When he entered the house, however, it was almost empty. As it turned out, his mother and sister plundered anything of value from the house. Loren found little more than 2 old blankets that belonged to his great-grandmother, which he held up to examine them. The first of the 2 blankets was an old but soft Hudson's Bay blanket. The second was older and rougher and brought back memories of it spread out on the porch by his grandmother when the cat was about to have kittens. While he examined it, his sister grabbed the first blanket, leaving him with the second one. "What are you going to do with that?" Loren asked her. "I didn't want that dirty old thing," his sister snapped impatiently. Resignedly, Loren took the second blanket home and put it away in a closet, where it would remain for some time. He would only later discover the true importance of the striped blanket. For the next 7 years, Loren's life slowly fell apart further and further. Due to an accident, Loren couldn't work for almost a year, and sadly, he was denied government assistance during that time. In desperation, he sent his children to live with his parents to ensure that they would have a good life. But his life continued to fall apart. Then he spotted something on TV that would change his life. Watching TV while eating ramen noodles for dinner, Loren happened to find himself watching Antiques Roadshow on PBS. It was little more than background noise, as Loren wasn't really paying attention. Surprisingly, he saw something that made him sit up and pay attention. A man on the show was presenting an old blanket that bore a striking resemblance to the one he'd taken from his grandmother's house. Don Ellis was the appraiser that day, and he was admiring the blanket. As it turned out, the blanket the man had brought to the show was a priceless artifact, and the price tag left Loren's mouth hanging open. I paused it, and I went and I got the blanket, and I'm sitting there holding it. I'm lining up the lines on the TV with the blanket, seeing if they match. Loren remembered, "This guy is on TV. The appraiser says $300,000 to $500,000. I'm thinking maybe this one is worth $5 to $10 grand. But why is this blanket so valuable?" When Loren showed his mother the piece from Antiques Roadshow, she dismissed him, saying, "Yeah, right. Probably nobody would give you $10 freaking for that thing." Her answer didn't deter him, however. He was determined to discover what he truly had. Loren decided to take his blanket to several antique dealers to find out if it was worth anything. Since he was living off a mere $200 a month, Loren would happily accept anything he could get. Unfortunately, 3 different dealers informed him that it was no more than a worthless Mexican blanket. He was close to giving up, but he still had one more person to see first. The family-run John Moran Auctioneers is an established company that's well known for dealing with Native American items. They were having an open appraisal one day, and he decided to pop in to have a look. He drove the 30 minutes to the location and put his blanket on display. An appraiser approached, and Loren hoped that he wouldn't appear foolish. What he didn't realize that it was none other than the head appraiser, John Moran himself. Moran examined the blanket and asked Loren about the origins and history of the blanket. Loren told him that the blanket had been passed down from his great-great-grandfather. He'd been a tradesman in the 1800s and had operated in Dakota. Moran couldn't believe his ears. "A lot of times a blanket or something will come to us and we won't know the history of it," Moran said. As Moran listened to Loren's story, he became more and more convinced that the blanket was an authentic Navajo blanket. "This has only happened maybe 3 or 4 times with an unknown blanket, where you see something and you know right away," Moran explained. "You walk into the room and you can tell." John Moran, keen to find out the blanket's secrets, sent it for tests and authentication. When the results were in, everyone was astonished. The dusty old blanket that Loren had stashed away in a cupboard for 7 years was one of the finest and rarest Navajo chief's blankets in the world. But just what was it worth? John Moran set the price at a staggering $200,000 for the blanket if Loren put it up for auction. But competing companies caught wind of the Navajo blanket and were suddenly very interested in Loren's find. Loren needed money and he needed it fast. And other auctioneers were all too happy to make his dreams come true with promises of advances, but only if he would back out of his sales agreement with John Moran. Soon, Loren found himself about to give in to overwhelming temptation. Thankfully, Moran took action. "I immediately went into crisis mode with him," Moran said in an interview. "I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you an advance." And true to his word, he handed Loren an envelope containing $9,000 in cash. "I've done everything I said I would. Just stay the course," Moran assured him. Just weeks before the auction date. And sticking with Moran would later prove to be the best decision Loren ever made. "Please be enough to buy a house or something," Loren prays silently as he enters the auction house. Before he knows it, the bidding is on. The opening bid starts at $150,000 and Loren holds his breath. Suddenly, the bid climbs to $500,000 and a battle ensues. A phone buyer and Don Ellis, the very same man who had appeared on the segment of Antiques Roadshow that Loren had seen, bid fiercely against one another, neither backing down as the price of the old blanket skyrockets. The bidding war only lasts for 77 seconds, with Ellis winning the final bid at $1.5 million. Loren can barely believe what's just happened. "They had to bring over water and stuff to me and wipe sweat off my head," Loren recalled. "I started hyperventilating because I couldn't believe it. Everything just went limp and I couldn't catch my breath." Joshua Bear, art appraiser, later described the bid on Loren's old Navajo blanket as a Fraser Ali kind of thing. So what amount did Loren walk away with? Loren received $1.3 million for his old blanket, after fees, but found it hard to come to terms with what had just happened. "It was just hard to grasp," he says. "I mean, I worked hard my whole life. I was in construction. I never bought anything. I never saved. I always rented. I bought used cars because that's all I could afford. I lived paycheck to paycheck my whole life." After the good news, Loren retreated to a hotel where he decomposed for 5 days. Loren's story illustrates how riches can be found in the most unlikely places.